Dear students, today we are going to see about the preference shares, kinds of preference shares, features of preference shares, advantages and disadvantages of the preference shares. Preference shares means the preference shares it's provide shareholders with a special right or preferential right, which means preference shareholders has a right to claim dividend during the lifetime of the company, and also at the time of winding up preference shareholders has a right to claim the repayment of capital. Next is kinds. First one is convertible preference shares. These shares can be converted into equity shares during the lifetime of the company. Non-convertible preference shares. These shares cannot be converted into equity shares during the lifetime of the company. Next is redeemable preference shares. Redeemable preference shares, it can be repurchased or redeemed by the issuing company at specific rate and specific date. Redeemed means repayable of amount to the shareholders. Non-redeemable preference shares, this cannot be repaid or repurchased by the issuing company during the lifetime of the company at a fixed rate. Participating preference shares. These participating preference shareholders, they has a right to take part in the company's surplus profit after getting dividend. They has full right to share this company's surplus profit. Next is non-participating preference shares. They cannot able to participate in the additional surplus. They has only right to earn dividend from the surplus profit. Next is cumulative preference shares. These shareholders has a right to enjoy cumulative dividend payout, which means if a company is not able to earn profit on during particular year, means that they cannot able to pay the dividend. In that case, that dividend can be transferred to the next year. When company earns profit in next year, in that time the company can repay the dividend to the cumulative preference shareholders. Next is non-cumulative preference shares. These preference shareholders has no right to claim dividends in form of arrears. They can claim dividend only on a particular year. It cannot be transferred to the next year as a arrear. Next is features of the preference shares. First feature is maturity, which means preference shares is like equity shares. Equity shares, which means the amount of the preference shares will repay only during the liquidation of the company, and also after meeting the claim of creditors, but before the payback to the equity shareholders. Next is claims on income. Preference shareholders get fixed rate of dividend from the company. Whenever the company has distributable profit, the dividend is first paid to the preference share capital. The rate of dividend on preference share is fixed, and also preference shareholders do not have any right to share in the extra earnings of the company except participating preference shareholders. Next is claims on asset. The claims on asset is superior those of equity shareholders. At the time of winding up of a company, after payment of the claim of creditors, next preference is given to the preference shareholders before the making payment to the equity shareholders. Preference shareholders are not the real owners, but uh, uh, they will be paid first before the equity shareholders. Preference shareholders has no right to take part in the surplus asset of the company, but they has a right to claim their capital amount from the company. Next is control. Preference shareholders, they do not have any voting rights related to management or control of the company. They has an voting right regarding resolution related to preference shares. And also they vote during the meeting of the company. Next is hybrid form of security. Hybrid form of security, which means preference shares is like a combination of both equity shares and preference shares, which means it includes some features of equity and other of debt financing. It includes some features of equity, means payment of dividend is not obligatory, and also only distributable profit is given to preference shares. Preference shares dividend, it cannot be deductible as expenses. These features are like the equity. Some features like fixed rate of dividend, no voting rights, these are like the debt. Next is advantages of the preference shares. There are two types. One is company point of view and the shareholders or investors point of view. In company's point of view, first one is no legal option to pay dividend. In case if there is no profit in a particular year, company is not it is not a essential one to pay the dividend. Next is long-term capital. Preference shares are the long-term capital for the company because the preference shares is repayable only during the liquidation of the company. Next one is some preference shares can be redeemed or repay either out of the profit or out of the fresh issues of the shares. And there is no any penalties for delaying redemption of the preference shares. Whenever they have the surplus funds, the company can repay the preference shares. And also the company give only a fixed rate of dividend. There is no any fluctuations or there is no any changes in the rate of dividend. Next is preference capital. It is like to measure the company's net worth. It enhances the credit worthiness of the firm. The preference shareholders, they has no any voting rights. They only take part in their matters, not in the company issues or management issues. Next is investors' point of view. First, investors, they can earn a fixed rate of dividend during the lifetime of the company. It is the superior security over the equity shareholders. I already told that preference shareholders are the first to pay at the time of liquidation. So it is a superior security. Next is preferential rights in regarding to payment of dividend, which means at the time of liquidation of the company gives first preference to the preferential shareholders for the payment of dividend. Holders can vote on matters directly, which means preference shareholders has no voting rights regarding management issues, but they can vote regarding if any dividend due for their shares or anything is unpaid. For that matters, they can vote. Next is disadvantages. Company point of view is first thing. Under company point of view, first thing, it is an expensive source of finance when compared to the debentures, because the rate of dividend is fixed one, when and also rate of dividend is higher when compared to the rate of interest on debentures. So it is a very high risk factor when compared to the debt. Then cumulative preference shares is a permanent burden for the company, because they have to pay the dividend throughout the lifetime of the company. If there is any delays in the payment of dividend, will affect the credit worthiness of the company. And next is, the dividend paid by the company to the preference shareholders will not deduct as a expenses while calculating the tax, but interest can be deductible at calculating the tax. Preference shareholders, they have voting right regarding their matters, and hence the control and management of the company sometimes may be diluted. Last is shareholders point of view. There are some disadvantages in shareholders point of view. First is, they don't have any voting rights in management affairs or control affairs. They can vote only to their issues, any dividend issues, for that only they can vote. Then the dividend rate is lower than the equity shareholders. The dividend payable to the preference shares will be lower than the equity shares, and also they have no any rights on the surplus assets of the company like equity shareholders. Sometimes the market prices of the preference shares maybe fluctuate more than the debentures. These are the disadvantages. Thank you.